Do it, man.
Alright, it says it's recording, which is so cool. This is just so cool. I'll edit this whole part out.
Yeah.
I'm learning how to be tech savvy.
Yeah.
But, I guess I'll just do my introduction.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sounds good.
I always gotta take a couple breathers. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. How you doing? How you doing? I just want to say I appreciate you guys being here. Today we have Paperback Warrior with us today. It's my first ever collab, so I'm pretty excited. Eric, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Zach, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Since I got the invite from you, I've been watching all of your videos and kind of catching up on all the old videos. So you're doing a great job. I really appreciate all the time and effort that you put into these things, and I really appreciate your take on book reviews and especially fantasy because that's all kind of new to me. But yeah, I'm Eric, Paperback Warrior. I've been online with the Paperback Warrior blog since 2013.
Mm.
We do the podcast. I do a podcast every 2 weeks, and we've got, I guess, right at 112, 113 episodes up there at paperbackwarrior.com. And then I've also got the Paperback Warrior YouTube channel, which has got about 200 videos, and I'm all over social media and things like that. So I'm around.
Yeah, and I actually how I figured out what your how I found you is because you have like a lot of retro thumbnails, and I'm a sucker for retro. Like I have like VHSs and everything, but it's like I'm such a sucker for like the old fashioned like 50s like mystery crime thriller, and like the horror ones are just so cool. And I don't remember which one it was, but it was like over a year ago that I saw it. I was like, let's check this guy out. So I watched some of your
Yeah.
stuff and I was like, oh yeah, this is a pretty cool guy. I would definitely love to put him on the channel once I figure out how to do all this.
My daughters would definitely disagree with you about me being cool. They think this is all kind of nerdy, but
Oh yeah,
but
my
they want me on TikTok and things like that, but I don't do TikTok, so I'm YouTube and Facebook. I'm the old stuff.
I honestly like a lot of people hate on it, but I feel like Facebook's a pretty good marketplace still. Like
Yeah.
I haven't done anything with Facebook yet. I don't like using Facebook. Maybe I like Instagram a lot more, but Instagram's a really good platform too, I feel like, to use for promoting, I guess, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
the Facebook community groups are really good. There's a lot of book groups, and that's kind of how I got out there with some of the vintage 20th century book clubs, and then the vintage paperback and pulp clubs as well. So there's a great community out there, great people. They're all really nice.
yeah, I met a couple, and now I'm actually pretty good friends with a lot of them that are on Instagram with me for self-pub authors, and it's actually just really cool, like, the community you can really build on books, which is just so weird to think, like, when I tell people, like, when I met my girlfriend a year ago, and she's like, "What's all these lights and stuff for?" I'm like, "Oh, I do YouTube videos." She's like, "Oh, for, like, movies?" I'm like, "No, books." She's like, "People watch book stuff?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually, surprisingly, I thought the same thing a couple years ago."
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I had heard about booktube like 2 years ago. So I was literally on my phone trying to find an app for booktube, and I realized
Oh.
like that's not an actual thing. That's just slang for talking about books on YouTube. But I was so mad because I was like, how do I get on booktube? I don't understand. But now I get it.
It's just so bizarre. Like, one of my favorite booktubers is, Mike's Book Reviews, and he always makes the joke that he's, like, an old man on it, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's just weird thinking about it. It's like it kinda is. He always talks about how it's, like, a younger people thing, and I'm like, "I guess," but I say, "Who cares?" As long as you have fun with it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And when you're talking about the old vintage stuff, I mean, we don't have a time machine. We can't really, go back in time and experience any of the old stuff unless we just do it through media. I mean, that's our only way to even, kind of go back in time and experience that is just through media. So, like your VHS tapes back there, is a good representation of what I think of as like the 70s and 80s.
Oh,
The
yeah.
the rental stores and the big boxes and your membership card and all that kind of stuff. So, it's
Yeah.
just it's like kind of like a timestamp in a way.
Well, yeah, and I slightly remember, I am the last of the millennials, so I'm proud to say I'm a millennial still. But,
Yeah.
I remember in my hometown, just 2 years ago, we had Family Video still, and they just went out of business, and I was like, because my mom told me, she's like, "Yeah, did you know Family Video is still a thing?" I'm like, who's renting videos like that? You know, it's just so weird. But
Yeah.
it's a cool thing. And I started getting into VHS tapes because nostalgia. And then I was like, I should have movies play while I'm doing a video because nowadays it feels like especially with TikTok, people's attention's just not there. So to me, I'm like, this is there so people can like watch the movie while
Right.
I'm just chilling. That was kind of my idea, and I don't know. I feel like it's going okay for me so far with it.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But I will say, I slowly have gotten into like classics more. I've been trying to read more classic novels, and I tried reading Pride and Prejudice, and I just don't think it's for me. I tried, and I feel really bad because like it's just, and I don't ever say, oh, it's because of the old language or anything. It just feels too girly for me, and it's a shame because I really want to read it because I was told it's really good, but I tried. It's just no, but sadly.
Yeah, I wanna read some of the classics as well and, like, fully appreciate them, but for whatever reason, I just can't connect, like, when I talk about classics, I'm talking, like, I tried Tale of Two Cities recently.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, I just can't get into it, I just can't connect to the characters or it might be, like, the dialogue kinda to your point, to a degree, it's kinda like the dialogue and the language and things just kinda throw me off. I
Yeah.
just can't I just feel, like, really distant from it for some reason.
Yeah, that's how I felt like with Prior Prejudice, I was feeling that, but, like, that's why I haven't read, what is it, Moby Dick, because
Yeah,
that's just I don't know, for one, I'm not a big fan of, like, boats and the whaling stuff, so I'm like, I don't really wanna read this."
right.
But I read, like, The Catcher in the Rye last year. That was arguably one of my favorite books I've ever read,
Oh,
like,
wow.
hands down. It's so game changer, and there was a couple people that commented are like, "Yeah, reading this as an adult is such a game changer." And I've never read it before, so I decided to pick it up, and wow, it's so good. I
Wow.
could see why it's a classic.
Yeah, I've never read it, I've heard it's great, I heard it's, like, really ahead of its time,
It
but
is.
I've never read it.
I will say, the main character, you're supposed to hate him. Just if you ever read it, you're supposed to hate the main character, but
Yeah.
at the end, you're like, "Oh," because I was watching a couple reviews after. I don't try to have, like, when I do a book review, I don't try to have, like, influence for how I feel about it. I just like to see other
Yeah.
people's POVs, and everyone's like, "This book was terrible because the main character," and I'm like, "I don't think you understood it."
Right.
But it was really fun. I enjoyed it, but
Yeah, I need to get to that one.
I'd recommend it. It's just so good. I also really wanna get into, like, the classic, like, 70s and 80s of, like, horror and, like, fantasy a lot too, because I love that stuff so much. I'm a big fan of retro things in general.
Yeah, yeah, there's great gems buried in there, so, yeah, it's
Y
definitely worth a deep delve.
yeah, like, have you read, or at least seen it? It's called, like, Isabel from Jane. I don't remember her last name right now.
Is it
But it's like a demonic possession thing. It's such a groovy looking, uh, image, but I just don't remember, but I saw it the other day, and I immediately was like, "Oh, yeah." I'm just a sucker for that,
it sounds
but
familiar, I think I've seen that cover before, I wanna say it's, like, some kinda generic name like Jane Eyre or something, but
yeah, it's something
yeah.
like that, and it's like a demon thing, and then it's like a half naked woman in front of the demon cover.
Mm.
It's so bizarre, but it's also just really cool.
It's one of those
I'm
that just grabs you from the cover.
Oh, immediately. I'm such a sucker. Like, I'm reading in my spring TBR, I have one called, like, Buried Live, and it's just no idea what it's about. Just a cool cover, so I picked it up.
Yeah, why not?
That's how I roll. Like, I wanna make a video probably this summer, maybe, but my girlfriend and I wanna travel the whole state of Michigan to every single used bookstore, and I wanna vlog all of it because
Nice.
I just wanna pick up books, so
Why
that's the
why
deal.
Michigan?
I live in Michigan.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, we wanna I just told her because she reads, but she doesn't read, like, as much as I do, or she just doesn't read too much in general because she has ADHD, so it really messes with her reading, but she likes to go to bookstores with me, and she just buys the special editions of, like, Sarah J. Maas books, which everyone reads those, but I just her and I make fun of each other because she'll buy like one book from Sarah J. Maas, and then she'll see me with like a stack of like this many books, and they're
Right.
all just mass paperbacks. So
Yeah.
I like it though; it's fun.
Yeah, bookstores are, like heaven to me. I just love spending time in them. Just walking in, smelling the books is like
Oh
it's just
yeah.
amazing.
Do you do you ever go to like Barnes and Noble, or do you just prefer like used bookstores?
So I do go to, Barnes& and Noble, mostly just to go to the horror section to see what's out. It seems like a lot of genres have fallen off quite a bit, but it seems like horror has kinda, like, reinvented itself in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. It's like the last 10 years or so has just been a revolution, and now you can go on Barnes& and Noble, and they have like all these independent publishers and small publishers just right there on the shelves. And I was in there just a couple weeks ago because my daughter had got me a Barnes and Noble gift card for Christmas,
Oh,
and I
rock
went in
on.
there and I just did like the stupid thing where I'm just like taking photos of all these books and just trying to remember all these books that I want to read and want to buy and check out. It's just there's so many. So I just start taking pictures of them just to try to keep track of it all. But it's an embarrassment of riches when you go into the horror section at Barnes and Noble. It's
It
crazy.
is. Like, usually, I would say, like, I feel like fantasy is just not, like, what it was, if that makes sense. Like,
Right.
it's just so full of I mean, I made a video about this, and I got a lot of hate for it, but I made a video about romantasy, and it's just that's all it is. Like, you have classic epic fantasy in just a small little nook, but surrounded by like Brandon Sanderson, and then you have all just romantasy everywhere else, and it's kind of disappointing. It's kind of depressing if you ask me.
Yeah, it seems like when I look in the fantasy section, because I'm still a newbie with fantasy, I'm more sword and sorcery than
Yeah,
I'm not really read any fantasy other than just doing the sword and sorcery stuff. But when I go to Barnes and Noble, it seems like the fantasy just gets lumped in with sci-fi, and then that gets lumped in with like the television tie-in stuff. So it's
yeah,
like, okay, wait a minute, I'm looking at like like some fantasy novel, and then it's right beside of like a G.I. Joe movie novelization. I'm like, these don't go together. It's like
yeah,
it's like it's fallen down so far in terms of sales that they just kind of lump it together with a bunch of other things, just hoping that it'll grab more people. So it's really disappointing. But like I remember, maybe like even 10 years ago, where you could go in and in any of the box stores, and you would find like Michael Moorcock, or you'd find all the Wheel of Time books or something would be in there, but just don't see that anymore. It seems like the space that was originally designed, I guess, for more books for fantasy and science fiction is kind of condensed down, and now there's more room for manga. So it's just
yeah.
like manga has like tripled in size, where the other stuff has kind of trickled down to nothing.
Yeah, like I'm a big fan of manga, but it's crazy the boom of manga. But it is sad to see like with fantasy, and it's always just the same authors. It's like I feel like Barnes and Noble they should take a shot at just letting smaller authors try and get a bigger name for themselves. But that's why I love used bookstores way more. I go to Barnes once in a while, but oh man, sometimes I can't stomach buying like a mass paperback for like almost $20
Yeah.
too. Like I'm getting into Cormac McCarthy, so I read The Road back in December. So I'm reading Pretty Little Horses and No Country for Old Men, and then I want to do Blood Meridian. And Blood Meridian's like $18 for just a small little
Yeah.
paperback
Yeah.
at Barnes. And it's just I can't stomach it. It's just I feel like I'm getting ripped off.
It is. It's tough, and I really, going back to the horror thing, what I really like about them is that they've at least tried to create so much with the covers and some of the designs of the books. So if you are going to spend $20, you're going to get something cool. Like I saw one in there the last time I went in there, and I know there's a lot of books that look like VHS tapes, but this one was
Yeah.
like it was like an old VHS rent or a box that you could buy like Scotch or Maxwell back in the day, like a
Yeah.
blank VHS. It's in like one of those slip covers, and you can pull it out, and the book looks like a VHS tape. I was like, okay, for $20, I'd be willing to spend it on this because it's such great packaging.
Oh yeah, that's so sick. I do agree with that. Like every time I go to see like the horror section, Grant, every time I go to it, my girlfriend avoids it because she hates scary things. And we always make jokes that like I would say she's like Barbie and I'm like the Crow for
Right.
our like personalities. So when we go to the horror section, she's just not there at all. I don't She
Right.
just evaporates. But every time I go there, they are the only section that I feel like it's a rotating door of new books. And it's so cool. But the other
Yeah.
ones are very lackluster and just makes me really sad. But
Yeah.
what can you do? But I will say though, I know you asked me this, but I would definitely say to get into fantasy, I would check out the Dresden Files.
Yeah, I wanted to talk with you about Dresden actually. I see those books all the time and they pop up on like Audible and stuff for the audiobooks. So I was going to ask you about those. You've read the Dresden Files, right?
Yeah, I'm actually on a reread right now. I just finished the first book.
So there's so I think there's I was looking it up earlier. There's 17 books. They first started publishing in 2000, authored by Jim Butcher. Some people say that they're fantasy. Some people say they're more like hard-boiled novels. Some people say that it's a little bit touch on like horror. But what do you can describe them as?
So I was told they're like urban fantasy, which I don't really know. So my best way to tell it is this might be the worst way to explain it to like how I explain the Dresden Files to people is it's Harry Potter for adults.
Oh wow, okay.
Because you're in modern day in Chicago and you're following a wizard and it's just supernatural stuff everywhere. And I don't know why I always just think of Harry Potter because every book just feels like a random plot, but
Mm,
trust me, it does lead somewhere. It's such a crazy series. But like to me, growing up in like the early 2000s, it reminds me of like Buffy, Angel, and Charm. So if you really
okay.
like that stuff when they were really big, it seriously, you're like, this could have easily been like a weekly episode of one of those. But Stormfront, the first one is kind of weak. If you ask me, I think it's the weakest one. A lot of people say it's the first two, but I like the second one because the supernatural thing in that book I really like. So it's whatever. But Stormfront's definitely the weakest. But it's just everything after like I'm doing a reread of it and I see so many things that he sprinkled in just this book that happens in like book 11, 12, 13, 14. That I'm like, whoa, like it's just mind blowing how much Jim Butcher just put through like so much thought and planned for the series. It's so good. And the characters, a lot of people say he's very hit or miss with like the women in it, but I think he writes the women really well. At first he's kind of weak. He kind of stumbles with some of the characters, but you grow with them and you just see how he just progresses as a writer. That's why I think it is. He just becomes a better writer with the series.
So kind of drilling down to the details of it, he's a professional wizard,
Yeah.
but he's is he on a police force or is he a private detective?
So he works with the police, but he's like not on their thing. There's
Okay.
like one of the officers' name is Murphy. She's like one of the coolest. She's one of the best characters, but she like hires him to help with the police, and that's where he makes most of his money. He's just like a broke guy because he's the first wizard to be like, I'm a wizard. And of course, a lot of people don't think so. But I use this example a lot when I explain things to people, like especially my videos about magic and everything, because Jim Butcher put this out there for the Dresden Files. I love what he did with it. Is we live in a world where there is magic, but like people are just too ignorant to believe it's real. We will instead say, "Oh yeah, it was just my imagination" or something like that. And that's kind of what he does in this. There's so much supernatural, magical things in this world that happen, but like people will just say, "Oh yeah, I don't know what actually happened." They'll just make it up.
So it has elements of horror too, right? I mean, there's like
Yeah.
vampires and werewolves and uh are there is there references to God and the devil or any kind of like war or anything like that
So
going on?
yeah, with that, so the best character in the whole series, personally to me, is Michael, and Michael is Catholic, and he does. And this is in the third book, so I won't spoil too much with it. But there's just things that does imply with uh with like Catholic religion and just religions in general, especially with like the Christian religion, a lot that he really refers to a lot of the stuff that like Dresden knows it's real, but like he doesn't like believe like he believes in it, but he also thinks that he has like issues with God and stuff. It's very deep stuff in this that on a reread you actually start seeing the layers of it, but it's so funny too. It's just a fun thing. It's where to me, I feel like I don't overthink it. So it's just like a really fun palate cleanser. That's what I explain to people. It's like a palate cleanser series.
Yeah, it sounds great. I don't know why I haven't read it. I think maybe because I've concentrated on vintage so much, and that's a newer series, so I haven't kind of checked it out. But when he's teaming with like the police officer, like you mentioned, Murphy, are there some parts of the police that know that all this is real, or are they like they're just kind of like it's just a coincidence or something like that? Do they know
So
it's real?
at first they think he's just a weirdo. Like they're just like, who is this guy? But eventually a lot of them start actually understanding what Dresden's talking about. But again, some of them are just in denial that they don't think it's real. It's
Yeah.
it's just such a weird thing to think about. Like to me, I look at it as like manga, where it's like I guess what I think Jim Butcher was saying, like every book is just Dresden's worst weekend ever, is how he explains it. Because usually this
That
stuff
makes
happens
sense.
over a weekend, and it's just so wild. And it's written in first person, so you get some good witty humor from it. And it's just I love it. And if I remember for audiobook, the narrator of it is from Buffy. It's the blonde hair guy that has a slick back blonde hair in Buffy, and he narrates the series.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and he does a really good job too.
Is there a through story through the series? Like with X-Files, there's like some grand design with the aliens or Supernatural, they're trying to find who killed their mother or whatever. Is there some kind of through story with it or
Yeah,
not really?
so there is, and so he's coming out. There's supposed to be 25 books, which is
Mm,
crazy. But
wow.
he's coming out with book 18. I think it's coming out next year. That's kind of why I want to do a reread just in case, so I'm all caught up. And he said that it's going to be 22 books, and then the last 3 books is like a big trilogy of like the ending of what's supposed to happen. And to me, I'm like, what is going to happen? Because the last
Mm.
2 books was actually one whole book, but they split it in half because it was way too big, and it was wild, and he had to release them back to back, like, a couple months between each other because it was I actually thought that was the ending of the series, how it felt.
It all takes place in Chicago, right?
Mhm.
The whole series.
Yeah, it's and it does time jumps every, like it sometimes it's a couple months or a couple years. It just does all that, like, if I remember from, like, book 1 to book 17, it's like let me think. I think it's like 12 years total that you're with
Oh,
Harry and all the rest of these people.
nice. I like that. I like when you can grow with the character.
Oh yeah, you my brother didn't even know I was reading Dresden Files, and on my Goodreads, him and I are friends, and this was years ago, and I posted that I was reading Stormfront, and my brother messaged me. He's like, "Zach, you're gonna love this series." He's like, "You're gonna hate Dresden when you first meet him, but he's like, you're gonna love it." So I was like, "Okay."
Nice.
But Dresden's a fun character. I mean, his humor is a lot like mine. I'm also very sarcastic, so it's like he's I like his humor because I can relate to it a lot. So
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's watching one of your videos. I can't remember which one it was, but you had mentioned that you were reading, and I may say the name wrong. Is it Dollinger series or Dollinger series? I think you were like
oh, yeah, it's the I think it's
Dolling
Darling. Yeah, it's the
Dollinger.
Flower in the Attic series. That's kind of why,
Yeah,
because I cannot pronounce the series at all.
I can't either.
But yeah, I'm
Um,
the Flower in the Attic. That's just I call it the Flower in the Attic series.
yeah, you and I talked about discussing that book because you had just read I think the first two in the series, and I just read Flowers in the Attic. So yeah, do you want to tackle that real quick?
Oh, I'm cool with that. That what did you think about the first book?
So I remember because I'm an old guy. I'm almost 50. So I remember when the movie came out when I was in I think I was in middle school or elementary school, and the movie came out in 1987. And I remember renting it on VHS back in the day, and I watched it one time, and then I just never watched it again. But I did remember like pieces of it, and I always said, "Hey, I really want to read the book at some point just to see how it matched up with the movie." And here it is, decades later, and I finally read the book. Man, it's a wild,
Is.
wild book. It's got so much stuff going on with it. Do you want me to kind of set the table for viewers to kind of give them a premise of the book, or do you want to do that?
You can do it. That'd be cool.
Yeah, so the idea of the book is there's um, Kat. Her name is Kathy. She's I think she's like 12 at the beginning of the book. She's 12 years old, and her brother is Chris. He's 14, and they have there's twins as well. They have twin brother and sister. They're 5, and they're living this happy life with their mom and dad. Unfortunately, the dad dies in a car wreck at the beginning of the book, and the mom, her name is Kathy, or her mom's name is Corinne. She's like, we don't have any money now. Like we have no money to pay the bills. Dad's dead, and we're struggling to keep the house. So she makes this horrible decision. And looking back at it now, she makes this horrible decision that the only thing she could do is take her and the 4 kids back to her childhood home in Charlottesville, Virginia. And at the beginning of the book, you're thinking, well, it sounds like they're rich. They got this huge mansion. Like, why wouldn't you want to go there? It sounds
Yeah.
like a wonderful place. But then she's crying about it all the time. You think, okay, wait a minute, something bad's apparently happening there. And at the beginning of the book, to kind of set it up, she gets the kids and they go into the mansion kind of late at night, like really early morning, so no one can see them. And Corinne's mother is just referred to as the grandmother. She's never actually named. She's just the grandmother.
Yeah.
And so they take the kids. She takes the kids through like a back door of the mansion, up some stairs, and they go into like this little tiny bedroom. And Corinne tells the kids, all 4 of them, "Hey, you're just going to be here temporarily for a little while because what I've got to do is my father kicked me out of the family and disinherited me. So all of his millions and millions of dollars, she doesn't have any access to anymore. And we don't know why at the beginning. We don't really know why he disinherited her, why she was ousted from the family. But her idea, which is kind of a smart idea, is she's like, I'm gonna wise up with my dad, build a relationship, and then he'll love me again. And then once he's accepted me, and puts me back into the will, then I'll tell him about you guys that I had kids, and he doesn't know that she had kids. She never told her parents that she has kids. So then she's like, well, then I'll explain that I have these kids, and then they'll welcome me, and they'll welcome you with open arms, and everything will be fine. And this will just be a temporary stay in the bedroom, which is right beside the attic. So you're thinking like this is only going to be for a couple nights. 3 years goes by. Like there's 3 years of these kids living in basically the tiny little bedroom and the attic, and the grandmother's got all these crazy rules where they have to memorize Bible verses, they have to pray, they have to do all these crazy things in order to still get food delivered to them. They get food like once a day. um, they have to stay in the attic at certain parts of the day because their servants come in and clean the mansion. They don't want anyone to know. Basically, it's just a secret that they're in the attic. They don't want anybody else to know that they're there. And it's a secret for the grandfather. The grandfather doesn't know they're there. It's just the grandmother, the mom, and then the 4 kids are the only characters in the book. Um, but like at the very beginning, I kind of respected Corinne in a way because she was going so far to protect the kids.
Me too.
I mean, when did you start to say like, okay, I'm losing respect for Corinne? Like, when did
I
that happen?
I think it was. Oh man, it's been a hot minute, but I think it was probably probably not the first visit, but I think it was probably a couple visits into it. Maybe I'm gonna say like maybe 3 or 4 visits. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
come on,
something's
dude.
up. Yeah,
And it blew my mind how much like all the siblings were so like, oh no, mom's gonna save us. And Callie's like, no, she's not.
right.
I actually thought in that book, so I will say spoilers for people because I mean this is an old book, so everyone just go check it out if you want. But I I kind of thought the brother and Kathy, I had a suspicion something was gonna happen with those 2. I did, and when it happened, I wasn't as grossed out as I thought I would be.
Right.
Especially the way that she would describe how her brother would, like, look at Kathy in ways, I was like, "Yeah, this is some Game of Thrones style stuff about to happen." So,
Yeah, yeah, kinda what you're getting at is they're in the tiny little confine of this room and this attic for so long that, Kathy and her brother Chris become the mom and dad to the twins. Twins are so much younger, and they have so much maintenance required for the twins. So they become mom and dad. So like you said, eventually you're just like not as stunned when the brother he becomes a man. He's like 17 by the time the end of the book. He's a
yeah.
young man. He's going through puberty and changes, and she's going through puberty as well. You're like, it's a natural progression that these are the only people in their lives. So it's a natural progression that they're probably going to end up having an incestual relationship, which is what they end up having. But oh, I felt weird about it. I think that's kind of the whole point is
Oh, yeah.
obviously it's horrible that they're doing this. They shouldn't be doing this. But at the same time, you're like, what else do they have? I mean, there isn't anything else.
In the
They
way
just have
that
each
you
other.
well, in the way that BC Andrews wrote it, it was it's disgusting, but also it's like they didn't do it for like, they did it because it was like a closeness. It was
Yeah.
so weird how she wrote it where I kinda was like, "Is this gross?"
Right.
But, like, I
Yeah,
knew
it's
it.
not graphic by any
Yeah.
means. It's not
No, it's
graphic
not,
usually.
like, graphic, it's not detailed or anything, but it's like
No.
you how she wrote it is just was I don't even know how to explain it because I was telling my girlfriend every single time I was reading this book, I would send her something after I would read it for the night and just tell her, she's like, "Why do you keep reading this book?" And it's like, it's so good. And I when if I can remember, when they got to the scene where the grandma, like, beats Kathy in front of everybody, I was like, "Chris, you need to do something about it." And he never
Yeah.
did. It
Right.
just blew my mind. It's just there's so many things because especially because the grandma had the keys, and it's like there's Chris, you are facing what, like probably a 60-year-old woman, like a grandma.
Yeah.
Chris, take her out. You're 17 years
Yeah.
old, you're a grown man, but he never does. And it just made me so sad. And it was worse that like every time something bad happened to Kathy, like when she like lost her hair or when she was like getting whipped and everything, Chris did nothing. And he always is like,
Right.
I'm gonna do something. And then he never does.
Yeah, it was weird. He had so much trust in his mother that she was doing the right thing. Like he just kept preaching that to the family. Like we just need to hold on because the idea is that they're being told is as soon as the grandfather she can patch up the relationship with the grandfather or really until he dies, which they're like he's on death's door. There's all these nurses there. He's going to go at any minute. Once he dies, then the inheritance will go to her and then she can get the kids out and they can go live happily ever after and dance in ballrooms for the rest of their life. But she keeps feeding them this line that the dad's going to die, the grandfather's going to die, and that they're going to get out of there. And he just keeps believing it so much. And he has so much faith in his mom. And then eventually you can see where it changes. And when starts to look at his sister in a different way, like sexually, his demeanor starts to change as well. And you can start saying, well, hope is now gone. And now
Yeah.
he's going to like this really dark place. But like you said, he never attacks the grandmother. He never fights back. He's just like beaten down so much that he just goes with it. But I was going to ask you on. I got this version of it. Speaking of which, Barnes and Noble, I got this version, which
Yeah, that's the one I got.
yeah, it's got like some stuff at the back of the book. But one of the things that ask at the back of the book for readers, like a discussion, is, do you think that so Kathy's mother Corinne had an incestual relationship with her half uncle,
Mhm.
which is which is why that she got ousted from the family. And do you think that Chris and Kathy have an incestual relationship because of the close confines of where they're living and how they're living, or do you think it was genetic, like they inherited this ancestral trait from their parents?
I used to think I'm very 50-50. I think there's a little bit of, like, the self-help, isolation part because, yeah, it's, like, 2 teenagers,
Yeah.
and they're always together, and you're going to see things from both of them. And it was like you said, like, they are essentially mom and dad to their little sibling, their little brother and sister. So I always thought, yeah, it was definitely that, but it also the way that their mom always talked about their dad and how they always thought of their dad with that closeness, and the way that, Kathy always referred to how Chris is a lot like our dad, the way he looks and everything, that I feel like it's a bit of both. Like, I feel like originally it was because it was, like, a genetic thing, and once they were isolated, it just ramped up.
Do you think that the do you think that the grandfather would have had an issue with her having kids? Like, do you think that maybe at some point he would have just been like, "Oh, it's fine you have kids. Like, yeah, let me go meet them. I'm on death's door. Let me meet my grandkids." Or do you think that he really was gonna have an issue with them the whole time? That's why she was 'cause me, I was thinking maybe he's not gonna have an issue at all.
I think he wouldn't have an issue at all.
Yeah,
I think the grandma, clearly she had an issue, but
yeah,
I don't think the grandpa would've. Honestly, I thought that too. I was like, "Come on, if he's on his deathbed, he's probably just gonna accept it." Because I mean, there's a lot of people, especially with this book, of how much that's another thing I love, is the way that people I love when books really push, like, religion a lot, and that's what this does, is it really pushes, like, the Old Testament a lot, and I think if her dad was a Christian like her mother was, he would probably be like, "You know what? This is my last thing I have to do." In order it would be like something where he's like, "This is my last chance to go to heaven."
right. Yeah, they kept saying it was his money that was getting him into heaven. That they kept saying that over and over. He spent so much money on church and donations and things like that. That's what was gonna get him in. But like you said, he was all, or at least the grandmother was all Old Testament instead of New Testament preaching forgiveness and things like that. They just never got to that point. But the kids at the very beginning of the book, the kids are they have faith. Like they even say their prayers voluntarily. Like it's not because the grandmother's telling them to. They're getting on their hands and knees and or they're getting on their knees and praying every night. But as the book goes on and the hope diminishes, then you notice that they don't really believe in God anymore. They just kind of said, "Well, we're not even going to pray anymore because it's not helping. It isn't changing anything." So they kind of just lost their faith as it kind of went on with the fact that they're probably never going to get out of there. But the other thing too that didn't make any sense to me was it's just a locked door. Like why?
I
She's like,
know,
I could have got out of there. And at one point they even get out of the house through the window, but they end up going back.
I know. I thought the same thing. I'm like, "Just go.
Right. Just
Just
go.
leave." But it was crazy that the push over the edge was when the little brother died,
Yeah.
and I was like, "That's the push?" And I think that's so morbid that the grandma was poisoning them. That blew my mind. I was like, I actually reread that like twice. I'm like, no way, no way she actually would do this. But then it
Yeah.
clicked where I was like, oh, it's the mom's plan as well.
Yeah, that's the thing, like, that's the sinister portion of it is who is the most evil person here? Is it the grandmother or is it the daughter? Is it Kathy's mother? And it turns out Kathy's mother is probably more evil than the grandmother at this point because
Yeah,
the grandfather dies, and then a year later, they find out that the grandfather's been dead this whole time. Like, she could have but she's off dating, she's off traveling, she's sailing. She'll come in and
getting
visit the kids,
married.
and she's getting married. She comes in from the kid, like with the kids, and they're like, "Where you been?" "Oh, I've been off sailing. You wouldn't believe the wind out there and the atmosphere, and it's such a beautiful day." And then she's like, "Oh, wait, I can't describe these things to you because you're not seeing the
it was
outside."
it was
I
so
felt
wild.
I felt also felt really bad for the mouse. They have this pet mouse,
Oh yeah,
and they have to find out if they're being poisoned, so they have to give the mouse the food, and the mouse dies this horrible death from arsenic poisoning, which is kind of made me feel bad. But yeah, the last question on this is who do you think handled the captivity better out of the four?
I think Kathy did. I
Yeah,
think Kathy and then Chris. And I will say another thing that was really weird if I can remember correctly, I always forgot the twins' names, but I think they all started with the letter C. Like the whole family
Yeah.
all started with the letter C, if I
Yeah.
can
It was
remember.
Was Corey and
Yeah, Corey and Cindy? I think it was no,
might be Carrie.
Carrie. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Carrie.
Corey and Carrie. Yeah. It was really morbid in a way because you realize that Chris and Kathy are still somewhat nutritious because they're going out and getting sun from the window and they're going out on the roof and sitting and getting sun. But then you realize that the kids, the little kids, they're like pale. They're not growing they're not growing like they normally should. They're actually like just a few inches taller by the end of the book than where they when they came in, which is
Yeah.
unusual since they were between 5 and 8, and they're very malnourished. So they're just not. Plus, they don't have vaccines or vitamins or anything that they're supposed to be getting as kids, and they're not getting education. So they're kind of whiny and they don't say things right because they're just not getting any kind of education, which was really sad. But yeah, when Corey died, when I was reading that this week, I was yelling at my wife. I was like, "Corey just died." I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I can't believe this just happened. But
That blew
it
my
was,
mind. I had to reread that too. I was like, because I don't try to like skim read or anything. So when I'm reading, I always try to reread things if I feel like I missed something. And when I
yeah,
saw that, I was like, what? She just killed a little boy. I gotta turn my light on
yeah,
real quick. I just realized I look like a bat right now.
yeah. I was gonna
One
say it's getting
moment.
really dark. Yeah, but um the
There
other
we
thing
go.
too, yeah, the other thing too that I was wondering about was with Corey. He's getting really sick, so they decide they're going to take him to the hospital. So the grandmother's like, "Well, I guess we're going to have to. There's no other option. We're going to take him to the hospital." And the mother agrees. I wonder if they actually even took him to the hospital.
Me too.
They may have just. I think they just went out and killed him. Maybe
I actually think they just dumped the body.
it's terrible.
It is. Like I haven't read the second book yet. It's my what I want to do. I want to read all these Emily Henry books I have listed, which is going to be next month, and then I want to read the rest of Cormac McCarthy, and then after that, for the rest of the year, I want to read her books, just because Emily Henry books are pretty simple. They're just romance novels, but and Cormac McCarthy's are a little deeper. But these books are so deep and like emotionally, it's a lot. It's so much.
Yeah,
But this book, my second half of last year for reading was so good that I didn't expect Flowers in the Attic to be good. Like I looked up like disturbing books and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, everyone needs to read this." I was like, "Really? Should I?" And I read it. I'm like, "Oh my god."
yeah,
It was
yeah.
so good.
And it's set in Northern Virginia, but so I grew up in Virginia, and my family is from the West Virginia side, Southwest Virginia, up into West Virginia, and honestly, it's not uncommon for relationships like that. The brother and the sister or cousins. It's it's weird to say that, in 2025, but that's still going on.
Yeah.
Like in my family, we had cousins that had a relationship, and they were first cousins, which is really bad. And then my I won't say it, but there's other two family members, a brother and a sister, that ended up having a relationship. So it's just weird. I just
It
can't
is.
explain. It's like no other place in the country, like the West Virginia, Kentucky area right there. It's just crazy.
E- Everyone makes fun of the South, but
I
it's
know,
actually Virginia.
right? So
Well, yeah, it's just and it's just the more I thought about it after I read the book, she her foreshadowing in that book was crazy. It's just like talking about how every single kid they're all blonde hair and blue eyes. The parents are all blonde hair and blue eyes. And you don't really think about it because you're like, yeah, that makes sense. They're blonde hair, blue eyes. And then you realize why. You're like, holy crap.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah, that's the thing.
it just blows
Um,
my mind.
yeah, for me, I was trying to write a review of it today, and I was thinking that like there's some symbolism in there, where they're such a fortunate family, have so much money, and then they have this family tree, but greed comes in and basically just rots everything. And I think in a lot of ways the incest is kind of symbolic to the greed. You got this almost foreign thing that gets inserted into this family dynamic, and it trickles down and ruins everything. So it's kind of like, I think that's kind of what the author was saying, was with the incest is it's almost like this passion for greed that's just corrupted everything, which is really how it started with the with Corinne's dad, um, basically just taking everything from his half brother, that all the wealth he took from his half brother. So it all
Mhm.
started right there and just got worse. So
Yeah, it always felt like it was a little spiteful too,
yeah.
like, between the brothers, it was, like, more spite, I always felt like, than anything else, but, yeah, when I was reading it, it's just there was just so much things that she was mentioning in the book that I didn't expect to enjoy or understand, but wow. Every time, it was just every time I would read a chapter, it was just a swing, and it was just mind blowing how much she could write such well thought out characters. And when I finished reading it, my coworker saw me reading it at work, and she's like, "You need to watch the movie. It's way worse." I'm like, "I doubt it. Usually, books are always better than the movie, unless it's Lord of the Rings. That might be a hot
Yeah.
take, but I like the Lord of the Rings movies more than
Yeah.
books. But oh well."
Yeah, they had the '87 movie, then they had the 2014 movie, which was on the Lifetime Network. I've never watched that one. And then apparently Lifetime Network has got movie versions of all the other books in that series as well. And then I think some other series titles as well from that same author. But um, I was gonna say, uh, she she apparently wrote the book in like 2 weeks. She's an illustrator, she's an artist. She's doing that all through the 50s and 60s, and then apparently in 1972, she decided, hey, I'm going to try to write a book, and she sat down and wrote a manuscript, and she couldn't get it published. I think it was a sci-fi novel. Never got published. I think it finally got released like in 2004 or something as an ebook, but it wasn't published. So in '79, she just takes 2 weeks and writes this book. It's just like it's nothing. She just writes this book in 2 weeks, gets
Wow.
published, and then within 2 weeks of it being published, it had already reached the #1 bestseller.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it's like literary gold on her first published novel.
For real, like,
Um,
I saw it well, with her so she died a couple years ago,
yeah.
and her books still come out, as apparently she wrote so many books that they just keep releasing her new books, like, every year. I didn't even know that, and I was
Yeah,
like,
so
"What a
so she died.
machine."
Yeah, well, she died in '86,
Oh, it
and
was 86?
she had some manuscripts that she had still been working on, and I think maybe two of the manuscripts are in this series, the Dollinger series, and the family decided that they would get a ghostwriter to come in. So it's Andrew Niederman
Oh,
came in and wrote or finished her manuscripts, and I think he's still writing new books in her series titles under her name, but it's Andrew
oh,
Niederman doing it. Have you ever read any of his horror novels, Andrew Niederman?
no.
There's one I'll have to send you. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's one that you got to read, and it was so good. Um, I think it's called Someone's Watching, and it kind of has you can see like why they picked him to write these books under her name because he has that weird, disturbing feel to his writing.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
in this one, this this girl and this boy run away together, and they end up going to this hotel, like resort hotel that's empty. It's been abandoned for years. But when they go there, there's like this guy living there, and he's like clearly mentally disturbed, and he's just living in this abandoned hotel by himself and eating like cats. And he's watching them through the walls, and he's peeping on them through the whole novel while they're making love and getting into a relationship, and it's really really disturbing.
It's like,
um, it's
Psycho in a way.
yes, it's kinda like that, yeah, and the idea of it being in, like, this big abandoned hotel was really cool, because there's so many rooms that they can go into and all these little places he can hide, but yeah, Andrew Niederman, I think he wrote a bunch of horror novels, but, for whatever reason, they picked him, but I guess it was because of his style of writing being a little bit weird. Looked
Could be.
pretty.
It's probably like, when they picked Brandon Sanderson to finish The Wheel of Time. That's what, because how Brandon Sanderson writes, they probably thought, "Oh, he's perfect for The Wheel of
Yeah.
Time," which he did a great job at finishing The Wheel of Time. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Wheel of Time. I read it all, and
Yeah.
I had some people DM me on Instagram, they're like, "Those are terrible opinions." I was like, "Well, I'm sorry. I read the
Yeah.
book too, so it's like I can have an opinion on the series now."
Yeah. I watched your video on it, and I've never read Wheel of Time, but I watched your video, and it didn't really prompt me to want to read it. I'm a big Conan fan,
Oh,
and
yeah. I
I've
got Conan sword
purposely
on my arm.
oh nice. I've purposely kind of avoided Robert Jordan's Conan books. People say they were actually pretty good, but I never have read them.
I just found out that he does it. He wrote Conan stuff about a couple months ago, because like I finished the Wheel of Time books last year, and I think Jordan could write. That guy was a wizard at writing, but he was too busy describing a shirt or a dress for me to be
Yeah.
like, oh man. So I was worried. I didn't want to do Conan because I was afraid he was gonna like ruin Conan. And
Yeah.
I mean, I never read any Conan yet. I own the comics from him. I have the original comic book line of Conan, but growing up, my dad got me really into the 80s. So Arnold Schwarzenegger is like one of my favorite celebrities of all time. So I
Yeah.
watched the first Conan movie, and I was just like, Conan's so cool. And
Right.
after that, like my girlfriend, I saw a thing on Instagram that was like, name us, who would you like sit on his bench with and talk to for an hour, alive or dead? And my girlfriend asked me, and I said Arnold Schwarzenegger. She's like, "Really, Arnold?" I was
Right.
like, "Yeah, dude, Arnold's so cool." Like, I love all of his movies. So yeah, I mean, that's why I became a Conan fan, is because of Arnold.
Yeah, the Conan, the Schwarzenegger Conan, and then also the comic book Conan, which I love those. It's a little bit different than the Robert E. Howard Conan, because with
Uh,
that Conan, like the Robert E. Howard Conan, when he created it and he wrote like the first, I don't know, 25 stories or something. But that Conan, like if somebody came over and someone said, "Hey, I need your help. I've got my girlfriend's trapped in this cave and I need some help. Could you please help me?" In the comics, he'd be like, "Sure, I'll run to your rescue." But in the Robert E. Howard books, he'd be like, "F off. I'm trying to get drunk here and trying to get laid. Like I don't care." Because he's so nihilistic in those books. Both versions of Conan are really cool, but I like the nihilistic version of Conan because he just doesn't care about anything except himself.
yeah, my coworker is a huge Conan fan, and he told me to only read the Robert E. Howard ones
Yeah.
because that's what he told me. He's like, dude, Conan doesn't care about anything. He's like, all he wants to do is get ladies and get money and kill things. And he's like, if he
Yes.
doesn't have to do any of that, he's not helping you. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean that's pretty much nailing it. Yeah, like in the armies, like in one book he's fighting for this army, and then the next book he's fighting for the exact opposite army just because of the money. He has no sympathy, he has no allegiance, nothing. He's just whatever whoever's going to pay him the most.
You know, I say I don't have an issue with that. Some people, I've seen a lot of people, especially I've noticed in like the newer day and age, a lot of people like my age and a little younger that are reading or watching movies and stuff that involve males like this. A lot of them hate them, and I'm like, well, you don't understand. It's okay to have characters like this. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean that they're the bad guys. It's just a personality. That's how I always look at it. Like I don't think too deeply. Like, oh, Conan's doing this. Okay, that's how the character's
right.
written.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. They'll say, is he a hero or is he anti-hero?" I don't know. He's just, it's just a guy.
Yeah,
He's
he's
just
just a
getting through
dude.
life. I mean, it doesn't have to be drilled down so far to describe him, but
Yeah,
yeah. So it's good. So real fast before we go, I wanted to. I feel like I've got you on my show. I'm interviewing you,
it's
but
all
I did
good.
want to ask. I wanted to ask you about your book that came out in September. I saw it on Amazon the other
Oh,
day.
Newtown.
Yeah, Newtown came out in September, 200 pages. It's got a great cover. Something about I wrote down my notes. Brady's a writer who returns to Newtown to write a novel about his lost best friend, but then things go chaotic.
Yeah. So so this book, I I have a video coming out. I think it's this Friday it's coming out. I like pre-record all my videos. So I'll have all my pre-recorded videos done like 2 months ahead. So
Wow.
some videos of me, you'll see me wearing the same exact shirt in 4 videos in a row because I record them all in one sitting. But it's just called writer's fault, like all my faults as a writer. It's just like editing mostly. And this one did do that. I failed at doing I kind of rushed this book, but this book I wrote, I was like 18 when I wrote this book. It was the first book I ever wrote. And it's it was nothing crazy. It was not the greatest, but I grew up in a very small town. So when I wrote this book, I just wanted to write a really scary book of my hometown. And then I read Salem's Lot from Stephen King, and I was like, this is it. And so I kind of wrote like a Stephen King style Salem's Lot, except mine's with a werewolf instead of a vampire. And I tried to push it to do a lot of the small town feels, which I think I did successfully in some aspects. It's just a lot of like editing. I need to review it again and re-release it. Like I plan on re-releasing a lot of my books because, like I said, I did a lot of failures before. Now I'm learning from it. But Newtown in general, though, I had so much fun writing. I actually wrote the main character, and so I found the draft of this book when I was 18. I found it when I was 22, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" That's when I decided to get back into writing, and I actually changed the character. Brady, or is my best friend of 20 years. His last name is Stoffer, but he asked me not to use his first name, so I just changed it,
Yeah.
and I inspired the main character from him and is from his wife, now wife. So they are the main characters in this whole series, this whole book. It was a blast to write them through it all, but it was my first stab at a horror novel. And now I have like 6 or 7 books that are either in their second or first drafts right now that are horror novels or just thrillers. I wrote a thriller novel that I want to write, and then I wrote some horror, and then I have like I don't even know what to describe one, but it's like a starting over one where it's like a fresh start novel where this guy like has to restart his whole life over. So I just whatever comes to the brain, I write. But Newtown, I don't know. I just was kind of bored, and the title of it is from the Eagles song "Newtown" from their Hotel California album.
Okay.
Fun facts.
Yeah, that's, I didn't think about that. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, it
Oh,
makes sense.
I'm a big fan of 70s rock, so
Ah,
I always tell everyone I have Easter eggs in all my books. I have Easter eggs of classic rock. My non-fantasy series is Easter eggs of other books and of themselves constantly. It's fun. I have more fun doing that because just it's just fun sprinkling those in, and then like I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan, so like my fantasy series, so many Led Zeppelin references in it, and I just do it because I love doing it. It's fun.
very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm excited. I think I need to go through all these books and re-release them and do it properly. Like I had a lot of faults, and that's just what happens sometimes, you know. It's when you're young, you don't really think about these mistakes, and then when you get older, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this."
Cool.
Yeah,
Great. Well, this was fun.
yeah, I will say, we could always do this again when you get into some Dresden Files, maybe,
Yeah.
and we could really talk about some Dresden Files because I love some Dresden. Audiobooks, good for it. I prefer reading it on Kindle or just regular, but I mean, audiobooks are just perfectly fine too.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Just doing stupid stuff, cooking or doing dishes or whatever laundry. It's easy to just put on an audiobook. Sometimes I'll
That's
do
it.
both. I'll be reading a book and then I'll switch to audiobook while I'm driving or something, and I'll just go back to my physical copy. So it's kind of go back and forth.
Yeah.
And then sometimes even if the narrator's good enough, I'll actually read along to the audiobook. I'll just speed it
Yeah.
up just a little bit.
I heard a couple people do that stuff. Like, I haven't tried it yet, but I hear a lot of people do that. And because they're like, it feels like someone's reading to me.
All
And I'm
right.
like, oh, okay,
Yes.
that's cool. Like,
Exactly.
I always do the audiobook while reading. Like if I'm reading a big book, I'll also do the audiobook. That's how I got through the Wheel of Time. Even though the audiobooks for Wheel of Time, is not the greatest. Might be a hot take, but I don't think they were very good. But same thing with Stormlight. That's the only way I got through Stormlight because of the audiobooks. But I didn't even finish that series because, each book is 1,200 pages. It's just a tome. And it's
Yeah.
like, if you're not enjoying a book, why read it? Read something else. So, and to me, I'm
Yeah.
like, I can read 4 books in the amount of time I would read this book. So,
Makes sense.
but
Cool.
yeah, everyone, thank you. If everyone made it to the end of this video, thank you. I do appreciate it. And again, make sure you guys check out Paperback Warrior. He does a lot of cool retro stuff because we love retro here. And I guess we like some new age stuff sometimes, unless it's romantasy. I got to
Right.
keep people hating on it.
There
Anyways,
you
though, I'll
go.
see you guys in the next video. Stay weird.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that was all right. So you click end recording.
Yeah.